Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another video. In this particular video, I will be discussing substance behind value and value behind substance. In our times as humans, we have come to worship certain precious things, placing a value upon said things, which upon acquiring said things, you would see a gravitation towards said individual. And the idea, for example, that jewelry itself, a precious metal, could be placed, all of a sudden you would see a standpoint of he might have wealth in order to achieve such a precious, valued object. But in the understanding of precious objects containing or symbolizing a particular valor, we might find that now the acquiring of more and more precious things, the more and more one might find that said individual held a lot of value. But in just the very notion that something as simple as a silver chain can all of a sudden invite the notion of wealth that is attached to silver, what might be attached to gold. You might attach loyalty to gold. And then when you look into gemstones, what might be some of the attachments we place upon said gemstones. And in each gemstone you find holds a particular resonance behind said energy that needed to combine in order to create said gemstone. Because everything is an alchemical process which energy is used to create said element in said form. And now if you look at the elements making the things such as a diamond, the purest form of carbon attached to a gold ring. One might say that a diamond attached to a gold ring would symbolize the purest form of loyalty, which is why upon a marriage proposal, it is not the woman that submits, it is the man. Because the man is essentially saying, I submit my life to you and will do everything I can to give you as best as I can, based on this offering. And most would say yes, according to the amount of value they place upon themselves. Now, in understanding the concept behind even symbolizations of acquiring certain precious stones, certain precious objects, you could see a voodoo of sorts, if you wish, with each object carrying a particular meaning behind them. Because if they didn't, why would you place that upon yourself? Why would you create such an attraction force if it didn't hold such a value upon itself? And we might see that in the beginning portions of representing value within said wearable objects, we might see the invitation of displaying a social status, being able to say, I have achieved this particular object. And in placing said object upon said body, one might find an invitation of attraction just as an invitation of destruction. inviting forces that specifically are an opposite force based on said valor, life and death, simply for displaying value. And so what might we find in a meaning behind said value? Once again, life and death. Look at the rate at which we used to dispose of human lives simply to acquire precious objects, precious resources that held a value. And the rarer they were, the greater the cost of life. And so, in the idea that there is no meaning behind sacred stones, gemstones, metals, on and on and on, well, that is completely false, because you would find the moment you attach a metal to yourself, your energy utilizing said metal becomes a magnetizing energy. You become a source of attraction, a form of value. But at which rate are you willing to stand for said value? Because the more and more and more wealth you essentially attach to yourself, the more and more and more and more and more individuals you need to surround yourself in order to protect said value. Or is the value not in the individual themselves? It is simply placing it externally of ourselves that allows us to see a value in ourselves. Knowledge is the greatest resource. It can be traded for anything. The rate at which you trade it, on the other hand, is entirely up to you. But in the pursuit of knowledge, you would find you acquire more and more and more things you can teach in exchange for anything. And where does it said knowledge sit? Inside of yourself. And so, where might you find symbolizations of what is inside yourself? And see how it influences your life. Each element carries a certain energy that was needed to bind said stone, to bind said metal. And each of these energies are an emotion. Because from suffering a low state of resonance, I can create everything known as matter. But from this point, you could actively see that each element is a manifestation of how said suffering becomes and evolves into the symbols we each use in order to represent the values of love we express outwards in our jewelry expression. And whether that be of collecting certain rocks, certain stones, certain gems, certain metals, you would find that each of these particular elements are a stage representation. A representation of evolution, of one state to the next, which is the same basis of the fundamental law of physics. energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It simply changes states. And with this particular notion, I invite you to see how you may change from this particular state. Thank you.